Critical race theory, therefore, is not a continuation of the civil rights movement. It is, in fact, a repudiation of it.
Yes.
They can say this because Martin Luther King Jr. is, of course, dead. Most of the tenets expressed by critical race theory are basically in line with what Martin Luther King Jr. believed in.
So wrong.
Wrong!
Yeah, wrong on so many levels.
Oh my God. Well, first of all, what he said isn't even what James Lindsay said. James Lindsay said it's a repudiation of the civil rights movement, okay, which is a fact. So critical race theory exists in the first place because Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and all these other people, and Delgado, they all said, hey, we had all this civil rights legislation passed, and we don't think it helped because magically Black people didn't become on the exact same social economic hierarchy as white people, like the day that the civil rights legislation passed. So obviously there's some problem with the civil rights theory. And then we're going to broaden this and say, oh, well, there's a problem with liberalism and rights and law in general. Okay. So yes, as a fact, that is the origin point of critical race theory. And this really proves that Vaush has no fucking clue anything about this topic whatsoever.
Yep.
And then it's even worse because he's like to say that Martin Luther King Jr. would be in favor of this doesn't even make sense, because Martin Luther King Jr.'s entire point was, I'm going to argue for civil rights to be given to Black people under a democratic liberal framework of rights, of a rights perspective. That was his entire thing. That was the deal that he was advocating for. And critical race theory says none of that works.
His famous speech is based on colorblindness. I want to be judged on the content of my character, not the color of my skin. Yeah,
exactly.
As James Lindsay pointed out in his last podcast about this, the "I am a man" was the tag of the civil rights movement. The "see me as a man, don't see my skin color." Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
This is the Christian argument.
Right.
Yes.
That's what's so crazy, because Martin Luther King drew upon Christianity. That's why he was advocating for common humanity. That's why they were saying, I am a man. I'm a man. I'm a Christian. We're all equal under the Lord's eyes.
We are all the same.
Yes. That was his position. And critical race theory is the direct opposite of that.
Yes.
Saying no. Like, as we said earlier, Kimberly Crenshaw directly says the "I'm a man" statement is bad for political action.
Yes. Okay? There you go.
She directly says this multiple times. She doesn't say it once. She says it in multiple places.
And she's right.
Well,
unfortunately.
No, it's
unfortunately.
No. The position that, am I not a man and a brother? Are we not equal on the eyes of God?
No.
That's terrible. No, listen, that's terrible for communist race revolutionaries. It's awful. It destroys their position.
Yeah.
It's non-materialistic. It's spiritual. It means that you can't leverage hatred between black and white. It literally is abolishing the distinction, in moral terms. And so it's just like, that's terrible for the communist race revolutionaries. They can't get anywhere with that statement. That statement will bring racial harmony. Bullshit. You can't have a revolution with racial harmony.
No, that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
That's why she's concerned. That's why
I feel like you're coming to our cynical position about politics now, Sargon.
Well, I've come to our position about communists.
They're forcing race into politics for electoral advantage. Literally, critical race theory is a product of trying to gain advantage in electoral politics.
That's what cultural Marxism is. That's what that's
what
all critical theories are. It's saying, oh, we didn't get the class revolution, so now we have to map it onto these cultural issues.
Yeah.
So for those of you following along, critical race theory is against color blindness. Martin Luther King Jr., pro-color blindness.
Right.
So the question that I really have is, because we don't know, the beginning of this video, Vaush seemed to be pro-color blindness. He did. He said he was a race abolitionist, and critical race theory was a form of race abolitionism. Is race abolitionism color blindness? It sure as hell sounds like it to me.
God, I might start putting race abolitionist in my bio.
You should.
Oh my God, you should.
See what they say. So what you say?
They're going to. Here's the mischaracterization.
Black and white.
Here's the mischaracterization they're going to make immediately, Sargon. They're going to he wants to abolish all the races other than white people. Look, it's right there in his bio.
No. But that's like you saying that's like a pagan coming up to an atheist and saying you're a Christian. No, I want to get rid of all the gods, all of them, no, I'm not, I don't want to keep the white one. No, we'll get rid of all of them, But yeah, like if they're going to characterize things in racial terms, then I am a race abolitionist from their point of view.
Wouldn't it be great if Vaush was here and we could ask him if he was a race abolitionist? Wouldn't that
That'd be
be
lovely.
Wouldn't that be so? We could get it right from him. We could settle it right here, right now. I don't think that's going to happen.
It's funny because Martin Luther King Jr. has specifically talked about being against Marx's materialism too. So
Oh, he's a Christian, of course. He has to be.
Yes,
I
big
know.
time.
he says, I am bitterly opposed to the metaphysical structure of communism as well as Marxism. It is based on what is known as dialectical materialism. I, being an idealist rather than a materialist, would therefore reject Marx at this point.
Oh my God!
Well, you know, he's a radical socialist, so whatever.
He's the
Very well
ultimate
informed as
Christian.
well.
He's against materialism.
Oh
He's
yeah,
an
I
idealist.
didn't know this until I did research for this video, because there's like an archive of
I didn't know that.
of MLK's writings. He like studied really deeply all like the Enlightenment philosophers and liberalism and
Wow.
Marxism in college. Like he really knows all this, what he's talking about.
Yeah,
That's
I didn't
awesome.
realize he was so well educated on it.
Oh yeah, no, he is.
Yeah, that's crazy. Idealism. I'm pretty much a materialist, so I guess I
It's not
disagree.
very good for an artist.
You're a
I guess
damn
I
commie.
disagree. What do you mean? Artists, all artists should be idealists, shouldn't they?
Yeah,
I kind of buy into that.
that's what a
Seems-
piece of art is. It's
seems
creating a
off-brand.
separate sort of pocket universe of ideals and aesthetics.
It is true. It is true. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Well,
if
but
you're a
Adam's
materialist, you're a
irrational,
shit
so-
artist.
I
He's
could
an
always
irrational artist,
change.
so,
I don't
you
care
can't
about.
figure this out.
I could always change. I could always turn over a new leaf.
Produce
Luther-
Soviet art.
Oh, that's the worst.
I know.
That's the worst. Oh my God. Can you imagine? How can you even
That's
call it
awful.
art if the state comes in and tells you how to do it? Like, how do you even call it art anymore?
Yeah, what do
So
you
what
need to
the
do? You
fuck
need
is
to
going
represent
on here?
communism.
Look, you guys are wrong. All art is political. Okay, just accept it.
Oh, this is SJW Sitch just tuned in. What's going on?
King Jr. was not of the opinion that racism could be solved with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. He was a radical socialist and a believer that America...
So wait, this is like a little sneaky tactic. It's true that Martin Luther King Jr. didn't think racism could be solved. Like, you're not gonna snap your fingers with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, but he did, however, believe racism could be solved under democracy and passage of laws in general, which is what critical race theory doesn't agree with.
And he even proposed a moral framework that would lead to the end of racism.
Yes, he did. Yes.
So,
who was
you
it
know.
that said the arc of the moral universe is very
That was
long,
Martin Luther
but
King.
it bends towards justice, I believe?
Yeah,
No, I
was
believe
King.
that was Martin Luther King, right?
Might have been. It might have been.
Yeah. Yeah. That long part,
Just
you're leaving
some
that
random
out.
racist,
Yeah.
colorblind racist, you know, from the 60s or
Well,
whatever.
some tradcon actually. That's what's funny is because
Yeah.
like
Evangelical.
right, because like I watched that Prairie U video about the Enlightenment, about the religious guy, and I disagree with most of what he was saying, but I realized Martin Luther King would probably agree with a lot of what this guy was saying in terms of like the badness of secularism. So
Yeah.
it's just interesting that Vaush is claiming
No, bro, he's a radical socialist.
he is a radical socialist, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Well, that means dialectical materialist. That means Vaush is totally fucking wrong.
I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. was in favor of a living wage, so that's a
He was
that's a
in favor of
radical
UBI
socialist
too.
position, right?
The UBI people always come out and claim Martin Luther King was in favor of UBI.
He might have been, but that's not socialism.
Yeah.
I couldn't find.
Some say.
Well, I guess you could say that Martin Luther King is a socialist the way Richard Wolff says socialism is when the government does things. Maybe that's
Oh, yeah,
the
okay, yeah.
definition.
owed a great debt to the black people in its population, and I guess the black people all around the world, really. And there are many, many quotes and speeches from him saying exactly this. The idea that
Now, I'm going to criticize PragerU in their 5-minute video for not giving quotes, but I'm going to give no quotes or evidence or anything about how Martin Luther King Jr. was a radical socialist. Just take my word for it, okay?
We had quotes. We pulled out
Yeah,
like half a
Sitch did.
dozen
What?
Martin Luther King quotes. What, you don't
it's
have
funny
those
'cause-
memorized, Vaush? What? Come
I mean,
on.
he's doing a live stream, okay? So he technically has a near infinite amount of time to just
know.
Google search a fucking quote that he
I
thinks
know.
justifies whatever his position is. And I know because there's so many articles out there where they try to claim Martin Luther King Jr. as a socialist. There's so many articles about
Really?
this. And it's so funny because they all have like a quote and you go, oh, it sounds like he's advocating for socialism. And then you find the whole context and he's like, oh, he's not actually
Out of context. Yeah, totally.
It's
out
like
of
the Karl
context.
Popper paradox of tolerance. It's
Exactly.
like it's an argument against communists, and the
Right.
communists are like, see, this means Nazis are bad. It's like, well, it also means that, but it also means you're bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, most of it stems from this is so dumb because Martin Luther King Jr.'s like 3 economic reforms he was advocating for was a jobs guarantee, a
Mhm.
living wage, and a public option for healthcare.
Okay, yeah.
If that makes you a socialist, I guess the Liberal Democrat Party in America is a socialist party, and Vaush and all the other socialists can just cheer because Joe Biden is the socialist revolution that they wanted, I guess. And I mean, even when Martin Luther King Jr. was in Oslo, he was talking about like, oh, he was praising the Nordic model. And that's another thing, the socialists, they always like to say the Nords are like these big socialists when they're social democrats. And that's the
they're
conflation they
capitalists.
always make.
Martin Luther King Jr. and outraged by the beliefs of critical race theory is ridiculous, especially since critical race theory is based in critical theory, and critical theory is based in Marxian analysis of class. Given the fact that MLK was a socialist, yeah, I don't know. Feel like he would have gotten along just fine with these ideas.
Total
The
fucking
critical race
lies.
theorist, Martin
Yes.
Vaush does nothing but lie. That's all he does. He makes it up on the spot. He is a liar, a constant, unremittent liar.
They do
I can't
use that
stand
word. They do use that word grift a lot. Do you think that's projection, perhaps, going on
Yes.
there, Sargon?
I mean, Sitch literally has the quote where he denounces dialectical materialism. In
Yes,
just
that is Mark's thing,
categoric
right?
terms.
Well, this is where
It's
where they pull
nothing
it from.
else but.
This is
Right.
where they pull it from. He says, Martin Luther King Jr. says, Marx had some critiques of capitalism I agree with.
Mhm.
Everyone says
That's it. That's where they pull it from. That's as far as it goes.
that. Everyone says it. But if he explicitly denounces Marxism as being purely materialistic and says in response, I am an idealist, and is, say, a Christian theologian, which he was, then he could not have been a Marxist.
No. Well,
No
here's
question of it.
here's another quote. Okay.
Oh my
Martin Luther
God.
King Jr. is critiquing a book that this guy named Bellamy wrote, which Bellamy was talking about some socialist utopia. And he says, on the negative side of the picture, Bellamy falls victim to the same error that most writers of utopian societies fall victim to. It's idealism not tempered with realism. In other words, such systems are impractical, like socialism. Bellamy, with his over-optimism, fails to see that man is a sinner, and that if he is given better economic and social conditions, he will still be a sinner until he submits his life to the grace of God. Ultimately, our problem is a theological one. Man has revolted against God, and through his humanistic endeavors, he has sought to solve his problem by himself, only to find that he has ended up in disillusionment.
I struggle
Yes.
to think of a
Wow.
more anti-communist state.
I know. it's
Totally.
like- Jesus Christ.
I mean, that's like the whole point of communism is it presupposes Rousseau's idea that man is made bad
Perfect.
by society.
Yeah,
He's made
yes.
perfect originally.
In
He's
its
made bad
natural
by
state
society.
is perfect. Society corrupts him. Yes, the Christian
Yeah.
narrative is completely opposite.
And
know, but-
correct
Right.
as well.
But
The
it-
Christian narrative on that is correct. Man
Yes,
is not made
very correct.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Christian narrative gets the psychology right. We are fucking apes.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny
Yeah.
you mention that because that's even Martin Luther King Jr. His critique that he gives of liberalism is that it's too optimistic and it doesn't account for the shitty sins of man and how people are.
Yes,
That's his actual
Yes.
the only critique of liberalism. So, but this
that's
is
our
what they
critique
do.
of communism.
I know.
You
Exactly.
gotta have it. All has to be saints for communism to work.
But this is what they do is because you can find Martin Luther King Jr. saying things like, "Oh, I think there's problems with traditional capitalism and the way it exists in my lifetime," and therefore they say, "Aha! He's a radical socialist."
Yeah, crazy.
Luther King was wrong
Oh.
and naive.
Wait, they did it. They brought him up. Conservatives love to bring up Martin Luther King Jr. because he's like a dead puppet they can wave in the face of living black people to tell them they're being uppity. That's the reason why
Oh,
conservatives
I'm
claim to
going
love
to go get a
MLK.
drink.
Sitch,
I'll
is
be
that-
back in a minute. I'm getting angry.
Sitch,
He literally just did that. Like, this little dead socialist puppet. being like,
projection
"Hey,
much?
Martin Luther King's a radical
projection
socialist."
much,
Isn't it crazy?
projection.
Isn't it crazy?
He's a
sitting
liar.
here.
He's sitting there with his hand up Martin Luther King's ass right now, working
Conservatives
his
love to
mouth
do
like a
this.
puppet,
Yeah.
and accusing conservatives of doing it at the same time.
That's the artwork. That's the artwork. We need a picture of Vaush with his hand up the ass of Martin Luther King Jr. puppeting that it's actually the James Lindsay and the conservatives who are puppeting Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, Martin Luther King saying, "I hate those conservatives."
But this
I'm
is
a
why I'm
radical
saying it's
socialist.
dishonesty.
Exactly.
It has to be dishonesty. I don't believe he is, because I don't actually think Vaush is stupid.
I
I
don't
think
think he's
I
stupid. I think he
don't
just
know,
is
son.
ignorant. I think he doesn't.
It could be from manifest ignorance, but I honestly think a lot of this is from dishonesty.